I knew trouble was coming the second I saw her beige Lexus creeping down my gravel driveway like it belonged there. The license plate read Love HOA, and the driver, Karren Templeton, head of the Oak Ridge Bluffs Homeowners Association, middle-aged, overly perfumed, and addicted to power. She was the kind of woman who thought a clipboard gave her the authority of a federal marshal. I'm Declan Zeller. I'm a machinist by trade, and I built my home and workshop at the edge of the neighborhood before the HOA was even formed. Which means legally they've got no jurisdiction over my property. But that never stopped Karren from trying. She parked that Lexus right in the middle of my workshop entrance, blocking the bay door. I was standing 10 feet away, welding gear still in hand, watching her climb out like she owned the place. I raised an eyebrow. Karren, you lost or just confused again. She didn't even flinch. Your lawn is exactly 1.5 inches too high, and I received anonymous complaints about the noise from your power tools. Consider this a formal warning. You're not even on my land, I said, and my shop's not under HOA jurisdiction. You know that. She waved her hand like I was a fly. We've had a board meeting. We're expanding coverage to include all bordering properties. It's for community cohesion. You can't just decide that, I said. She glanced at her Lexus. Well, until you comply, I'm afraid your machinery access is suspended. By blocking my shop with your car, I laughed. That's trespassing, Karren. Then call the police, she said, walking off toward the street without a care in the world, so I did one better. My workshop's got reinforced steel doors, a keypad lock, and a motorized rolling gate. I built it for security, not drama, but drama found me. After Karren strutted into my shop to snap photos of what she called code violations, I stepped outside, tapped the control on my key fob, and let the gate rumble shut behind her, the look on her face through the glass window when she realized she was locked in. Priceless. I flipped the switch that cuts power to the interior keypad from the breaker box outside. She was sealed in tight, climate-controlled, well-lit, and stocked with bottled water, but no way out unless I let her. I wrote a quick note, taped it to the inside of the glass. Not HOA property. Not your rules. Back in 5 days. Enjoy the peace and quiet. Then I loaded my truck, hit the road, and drove north toward the Smoky Mountains. I had a cabin up there, no cell signal, no neighbors, and definitely no HOA Karens. Best vacation I've had in years. When I pulled back into town 5 days later, my truck tires crunching over the gravel, the first thing I noticed was the cluster of lawn chairs set up across the road. 3 of my neighbors, Walt, a retired firefighter, Denise, a nurse from down the block, and a kid named Jordan who lived with his grandparents, were sitting there with popcorn and lemonade like it was movie night. Walt raised a hand. Thought you'd be back yesterday. Had to wait out a thunderstorm in the mountains, I said, stepping out and stretching. Everything quiet, Denise laughed. If you count 3 HOA board members showing up with bolt cutters and getting chased off by your security cameras quiet, then yeah. Real peaceful, Jordan grinned. She screamed at the lens for 30 straight minutes on day 3, called you a domestic terrorist, I nodded. She called the cops? Oh yeah, Walt said. Twice. Local deputy came out, checked the property line, and left laughing. I walked up to the keypad and punched in the code. As the gate rolled open, the interior lights snapped on, and there she was, Karren Templeton, leaning against my lathe with a tangle of frizzled hair, mascara smudged under both eyes, and a phone battery long since dead in her hand. You absolute lunatic, she snapped, voice raw from disuse or screaming or both. You broke into my building, I said calmly, stepping inside. I simply secured it, didn't touch you, didn't threaten you, didn't so much as raise my voice. You walked in. I shut the door. You locked me in a prison. It's a workspace with a stocked fridge and HVAC. You were more comfortable than half the town. You won't get away with this, she hissed, brushing past me. Already did. She stormed out, heels clacking on the concrete, and the trio in the lawn chairs gave a light applause as she stomped past them. Karren didn't even look at them. She marched straight up the road, probably toward the HOA clubhouse, which last I heard they'd converted from a pool house without a permit. I walked over to Walt. "Did she try anything serious?" Filed a trespassing claim. "Sheriff's office dismissed it after your security footage showed her entering uninvited. She also tried to accuse you of unlawful detainment." And, Denise chuckled. "Deputy said technically she detained herself." I nodded. "I'll file a report anyway, just in case she gets creative." But I didn't have to. Later that evening, as I was organizing some paperwork in my office, I got a call from my cousin Mariah. She's an assistant DA in the next county over, and she keeps tabs on legal filings like most people check the weather. "You've got a storm coming," she said, without preamble. "Let me guess, Karren. She filed a civil suit against you for intentional infliction of emotional distress." Which would have been laughable except she attached forged documents claiming your property was under HOA regulation. I sat down slowly. She submitted forgeries in a court filing? Yup. Fake maps, altered zoning records, and the kicker, she used the HOA's official letterhead. That's fraud, Declan. And not the kind that gets a slap on the wrist. "Think she did it alone?" Mariah snorted. "Doubt it. The forgeries are clean, too clean. Someone on their boards got access to city records, or they paid someone who does." I exhaled through my nose, the gears already turning in my head. "Tell you what," she continued. "I'll make a few calls. If you can get me copies of the originals from the assessor's office, I can start a complaint with the state licensing board." Done. The next morning, I was waiting outside the county assessor's office when it opened. I walked out 30 minutes later with certified copies of every zoning map from the past 20 years, all showing that my property was never annexed, never subject to HOA bylaws, and never part of their jurisdiction. I didn't go home. Instead, I drove straight to the city clerk's office, where a friend of mine named Ron worked. He'd been in public records longer than anyone in town and knew every trick in the book. When I laid the forged documents next to the originals, he let out a low whistle. "Someone's in deep," he muttered, studying the altered seals. "These were made using a city watermark from 5 years ago. We updated them last spring. Can you give me a notarized statement to that effect?" He nodded. "And I'll flag it with the mayor's office. They've been looking for an excuse to reign in that HOA for months." That afternoon, I walked into the sheriff's department with a folder an inch thick and a thumb drive full of security footage, timestamps, and forged documents. Deputy Mallory, a guy who always wore mirrored sunglasses indoors for reasons no one understood, looked through it all without saying a word. When he finally spoke, it was to say, "We're opening an investigation." By sunset, Karren's Lexus was gone from her driveway. By morning, her house was surrounded by unmarked sedans. And by the end of the week, 3 members of the HOA board, including their treasurer, a smug little man named Clifton who once tried to fine a teenager for chalk drawings, were arrested for fraud, tampering with public records, and conspiracy to commit municipal zoning violations. The news spread through Oak Ridge Bluffs like wildfire. Residents who'd been too scared to speak up before started coming forward with their own stories: bogus fines, threats of foreclosure, even forged signatures on HOA ballots. Denise organized a town hall at the local community center. Over 60 homeowners showed up. Walt brought a projector, I brought evidence. And Jordan, bless his teenage heart, brought a full printed timeline of every HOA meeting for the past 2 years, color-coded and annotated. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't rant or gloat. I laid out what happened. The forged documents, the attempted annexation, the illegal surveillance some homes had been subjected to, and then I made a simple suggestion. "Why don't we dissolve the HOA altogether?" There was a moment of stunned silence. Then someone clapped. Then someone else. And within minutes, the room was on its feet. Turns out, the original HOA charter didn't meet the quorum requirements at the time of its creation. A real estate lawyer named Tasha, who had stayed quiet for months after being fined for planting native wildflowers, stood up and explained exactly how to file for dissolution. Within 10 days, the paperwork was filed with the state. The HOA's charter was under review. Their accounts were frozen. And Karren, she was last seen boarding a bus out of town with her lawyer in tow and a duffel bag that looked suspiciously like it held her entire sense of superiority. As for me, I replaced the keypad lock on my workshop, not because I was worried, it was more symbolic, a fresh start. And I hung a new sign on my gate just beneath the camera. It read, "Private property. Not subject to fiction." The morning after the town hall, I was on my porch sorting through paperwork when an unfamiliar black SUV pulled up to the curb. Two men in plain clothes stepped out. They moved with quiet coordination, no wasted motion, no hesitation. The taller one flashed a badge from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. "Declan Zeller," he asked. "That's me. I'm Agent Yates. This is Agent Monroe. We'd like to ask you a few questions about the Oak Ridge Bluffs HOA." I motioned toward the workbench on my porch. "You're welcome to sit. Coffee's still hot." They declined. Yates pulled out a notepad. "We reviewed the evidence you submitted to the sheriff's office. It's part of a broader investigation we've been conducting into fraudulent land acquisitions across several counties. Your HOA's actions mirror tactics we've seen tied to a regional shell company laundering money through illicit zoning expansions." I leaned forward. "You're saying the HOA wasn't just power tripping. They were laundering money." "Not all of them. But 3 of the board members had ties to a holding company based in Nashville. That company's been quietly buying up properties through fake annexations and inflated liens, then flipping them to affiliated LLCs. The forged documents you exposed were their first concrete mistake." Monroe added, "We traced the watermark used in those records to a private contract printer who's already given us a statement." He named Clifton, the board treasurer, as the one who paid him in cash to duplicate city forms. It hit me like a hammer to the chest. This wasn't just corruption. It was organized, deliberate, and bigger than any of us in the neighborhood had realized. Yates flipped a page in his notebook. "We'll need your full statement and copies of everything you've got: maps, footage, the gate logs from your workshop. We've already issued warrants for digital records from the HOA's internal servers." I handed over a USB drive. "That's everything I haven't already given to the sheriff. And if you dig through the HOA's April expense report, you'll find a $3,200 line item marked Community Enrichment Printing. That's when they tried to reclassify my property." Yates nodded. "We've got that flagged." They left after another 10 minutes, and I stood there for a long while, watching the SUV disappear around the bend. This was no longer just a story about a petty neighbor and a power-hungry board. It was a criminal enterprise that had wormed its way into people's homes, lives, and deeds. I sent a group text to Denise, Walt, and a handful of others who'd been at the town hall. Told them to be ready, we had a bigger storm coming. That afternoon, I was in my workshop replacing a belt on the drill press when a knock came at the side door. It was Samira, a single mother who lived 3 streets over. She looked exhausted, her hands trembling as she held out a manila envelope. "They tried to take my house," she said. "Said I owed over $9,000 in fines for non-compliant window treatments. I've never missed a payment, Declan, not once. But I checked the lien notice they posted. It's fake. The county clerk has no record of it." I opened the envelope. Inside were photocopies of the supposed lien, stamped with the HOA's seal. But the formatting was off, fonts mismatched, and the notary signature was identical to the one on documents from my case. They were recycling forgeries. "Did you already talk to the sheriff?" I asked. "They told me to bring it to you first, said you'd know what to do." I scanned the pages, then stepped aside to let her in. "I'll get this to the state investigators. You hang on to the originals, and if anyone shows up at your door claiming authority, call me first." That night, I pulled up the HOA's public records from the past 2 years. There were over 24 similar liens filed against residents, all curiously within a 6-month window. Most had been resolved quietly, with homeowners either paying or selling. I started cross-referencing names. 4 had moved out. 2 had filed for bankruptcy. One, an elderly widower named Mr. Haverson, had been forced into assisted living after losing his home. I called Mariah, my cousin, at the DA's office. She answered on the second ring. They used forged liens to force sales. I've got names, dates, and matching document patterns. Text me the list, she said. I'll add it to the fraud case. If they coerced or intimidated residents into selling under false pretenses, that's racketeering. That's federal. After hanging up, I sat back in my chair and stared at the wall for a long time. What started as Karren blocking my shop had revealed a rot underneath the foundation of our entire neighborhood. The next morning, the front page of the local paper ran the headline, "Oak Ridge HOA under federal investigation for fraud and racketeering." Underneath was a picture of Karren handcuffed and being led out of a courthouse. Her expression wasn't angry this time, it was hollow. Like someone who just realized they were never in control in the first place. The article detailed the charges: document forgery, property fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to defraud the public, and illegal seizure. Clifton was implicated as the financial architect, and another board member, Tina Malloy, was accused of bribing a junior zoning clerk to overlook the fraudulent maps. The neighborhood came alive like someone had flipped a switch. People were knocking on each other's doors, comparing letters, fines, and payments. Denise helped organize a restitution committee. Walt offered to lead a neighborhood safety group. Even Jordan's grandfather, a retired civil engineer, volunteered to help audit the HOA's old records for inconsistencies. Within a week, the state froze the HOA's remaining bank accounts. Over 20 residents filed civil claims to recover illegally collected fines. The fraudulent LLC that had purchased several homes was subpoenaed by the Attorney General's office. And the City Council announced they were reviewing all private zoning authority granted to HOAs countywide. One afternoon, as I was loading scrap metal into my truck, a car pulled up. An older man stepped out, tall, lean, with a quiet confidence. He introduced himself as Mr. Haverson's son. He'd flown in from Colorado after hearing about the investigation. "I'm told you helped uncover what they did," he said. "I just locked someone in a shop and went on vacation," I replied. He shook his head. "No, you pulled the thread and it unraveled everything." He handed me a small, folded envelope. "My father wanted you to have this. He passed away last night, but he was lucid to the end and he knew you'd made this right." I waited until he'd gone before opening it. Inside was a handwritten note in unsteady script. "Thank you for standing where others bowed. I sleep easier knowing men like you still exist." I folded the note and put it in my back pocket. That evening, I walked to the edge of my property and stood by the old stone marker that separated my land from the rest of Oak Ridge Bluffs. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the hills. For the first time in years, it felt like the ground beneath my boots wasn't shifting. We'd won something more than a legal battle. We'd reclaimed our right to live without fear, without intimidation, and without someone like Karren deciding who got to be comfortable and who didn't. The HOA had built itself on paper threats and fake authority. But in the end, it fell to the one thing it couldn't fabricate: truth. And it all started because someone parked where they didn't belong. It took about 3 weeks for the dust to settle, but when it did, Oak Ridge Bluffs looked nothing like the place it used to be. The first real sign of change came on a Tuesday morning. I was replacing the fuel line on my backup generator when a city maintenance crew rolled up with 2 flatbed trucks and a backhoe. Without a word, they started dismantling the old HOA sign at the front of the neighborhood. The faux stone monstrosity that used to announce Oak Ridge Bluffs, a community of distinction, was reduced to rubble in under an hour. No ceremony, no speeches, just steel and diesel doing what needed doing. I didn't celebrate. I just watched from the end of my driveway, arms crossed, feeling the quiet satisfaction of something being made right. Later that afternoon, a woman I hadn't seen before knocked on my shop door. She introduced herself as Valerie HOA, assistant to the State Housing Commission. Said she'd been sent to conduct interviews and verify restitution claims. I've got a list of 22 households affected by fraudulent liens and zoning misrepresentations, she said, flipping through a spiral notebook. But it's growing. Every day someone else finds something. The people here were scared, I said, and the HOA counted on that. They figured no one would ever challenge them because it wasn't worth the hassle. Well, now it's worth something, she said. We're working with the state's Victim Compensation Fund to reimburse those who lost property or paid illegitimate fines. The board members under indictment are being held without bail. Their assets are frozen, and the DA's office is pursuing seizure to funnel those funds back to the victims. She paused, then looked me in the eye. You started this, whether you meant to or not. Yeah, well, I said, wiping my hands on a rag. I just wanted peace and quiet. Didn't expect it to turn into a statewide audit. She nodded, then pulled a folded form from her bag. This is a formal statement request. We'd like to use your case as the anchor for the prosecution. Your recordings, logs, and the timeline you mapped out are the cleanest evidence we've got. I'll sign whatever you need, I said. Just make sure the ones who got squeezed see something back. I spent the next 2 days helping Valerie catalog evidence from other residents. Old emails, HOA newsletters with buried threats in the fine print, even a stash of unfiled violation notices someone found behind a false wall in the abandoned HOA clubhouse. Each piece was tagged and uploaded to the Commission's secure server. On Thursday, the mayor held a press conference. He stood on a makeshift platform in front of the community center, flanked by city attorneys and a representative from the state attorney general's office. The crowd was larger than I expected, probably over 100 people. Some from neighboring towns that had faced similar HOA overreach. We are officially launching a task force to investigate unlawful HOA activity across the state, the mayor said. Oak Ridge Bluffs will serve as our model for reform, and the residents here have shown what can be accomplished when people stand together. He paused, then pointed to the crowd. And one man in particular had the courage to push back when everyone else stayed quiet. I didn't like the attention, but I gave a quick nod when people turned to look. Denise clapped loudly. Walt gave a single, approving grunt. Even Jordan, who now wore a lanyard and carried a clipboard like an intern for a senator, raised a fist. After the press cleared out, the mayor approached me personally. We've got a proposition, he said. City Council's drafting a new municipal charter that limits HOA power. We want you on the advisory board. I'm a machinist, I said, not a politician. That's exactly why we want you, he replied, someone who understands what it's like to deal with this nonsense firsthand. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. The following week, a formal trial date was announced. The charges were stacked like cordwood: conspiracy to commit wire fraud, criminal impersonation of municipal authority, falsification of public records, and aggravated property theft. Clifton had attempted to negotiate a deal, but the assistant DA rejected it outright. The case was airtight, and they wanted a public reckoning. I was called to testify. The courtroom was packed on the first day. Journalists filled the back rows. A few former board members sat with their attorneys, visibly deflated. Karren, in a pale gray suit with her hair tied back tight, stared straight ahead like she was trying to will herself invisible. When I took the stand, I stuck to the facts. No embellishments. I described the events as they happened: the unauthorized expansion vote, the forged documents, the illegal attempt to annex my property. I explained how I discovered the forgery, how I traced the tampered records, and how the security footage confirmed everything. I didn't mention the workshop lock-in. The prosecution had already cleared me of wrongdoing, and the judge had ruled it irrelevant to the charges. But when I walked past Karren to return to my seat, she finally looked up. Her expression wasn't angry or defiant, it was hollow. Like someone who'd played the same game for too long and finally realized they'd been losing the whole time. The trial lasted 11 days. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Sentencing was scheduled for the following month. Clifton got 12 years. Tina Malloy received 8. Karren got 10, with no chance of parole for at least 7. The judge called their actions a coordinated attack on the trust and security of private citizens. Restitution payments began shortly after. Homeowners started receiving checks for illegally seized funds, and those who'd lost property were offered compensation from the state's emergency housing fund. Samira, who'd nearly lost her home over a fake violation, used her settlement to start a legal defense co-op for other working-class homeowners facing HOA harassment. And me, I finally took the out-of-order sign off the front gate of my workshop. I replaced it with a new one, welded from steel and painted fire engine red. It read, "No committees, no bylaws, no nonsense." I also agreed to sit on the advisory board for the new municipal charter, not because I liked politics, but because someone needed to make sure this never happened again. I kept my shop running, spent weekends fishing off the riverbank, and took the occasional call from communities asking how we'd done it. One day, a man from a nearby county stopped by. Said his neighborhood was dealing with a similar HOA problem. He'd read about the trial, seen my name in the paper, and wanted advice. "Where do we start?" he asked. I handed him a flash drive with a copy of everything: templates, filings, even the security footage timestamps. "You start by watching everything," I said. "Then you start asking questions. Loud ones." He nodded, thanked me, and drove off. After he left, I walked back into the shop, switched off the lights, and stood in the quiet for a moment. The machines were still, the air smelled like oil and metal, and the only sound was the ticking of the wall clock. This place had once been the reason Karren tried to take everything. Now it was the reason she'd lost it all. And that, as far as I was concerned, was justice enough.